Welcome everyone to ComplyPlus Presents. This is episode 31, and I'm your host today, Richard Dune, and I've got my colleague Normoyle, our Chief Operating Officer. Welcome, Louis.
Hi, Rich. Yeah, a bit strange today, different setup, but yeah, good to be back. Good to be talking about some interesting topics again.
Yeah. So I'm actually in Coventry today, and Louis is somewhere. Is it Warwickshire? Not Warwickshire, or is it Staffordshire? Somewhere up there.
I'm actually in Coventry right now.
Are you?
I wouldn't say secret location, but yeah, I'm at a location in Coventry. Yeah.
Okay, it's secret enough that I didn't actually know. So there you go. But anyway, look. So we're continuing with our series of podcasts. When we started the year, it was mostly Louis hosting me, where we would have conversations about things that particularly pertain to what I do, looking at how health and social care organizations work and how they are regulated, some of the challenges that these organizations are facing, and also solutions. We don't just want to talk about problems, we want to come up with solutions that people can actually use. So we flipped the script 2 weeks ago, and this is the third week in a row now where I'm talking to Louis, and we're focusing more on the operational side, the technology, because Louis actually deals with most of our clients and partners. So to build the technology, but also to understand the pain points that health and social care managers and leaders are facing. So today we are going to be talking about what sort of solution people need when it comes to compliance software. There are many different types of compliance software now, especially post-COVID. There's just an abundance of solutions. But there's almost that Goldilocks effect in a way, where people are looking for the perfect system that does everything. And we've dealt with a lot of people actually who want the system to do everything. But our contention, in a way, was always that you can't do everything well. If you're a business that is developing solutions, it's better actually to find an area that you are very good at. Then you develop some of the best technologies around that area. Like for us, for most of the early years, actually, we were focusing on training and development. Then we started looking at introducing e-learning around 2014, 15. And then we kept building on the back of that. But we know that we can't do everything. So, Louis, can we have everything in one system?
I think having everything in one system is realistic, and obviously it also presents a lot of risks to businesses as well. So I think, in my experience, even with the sort of technology discussions we have with our developers and strategy discussions we have, while you can broaden on your specialties or your strengths, as you've highlighted there, I think to claim that you can solve every problem that's presented with compliance, or CQC compliance, Ofsted compliance, whatever regulator you're working toward, I think it's wholly unrealistic a lot of the time. I'm yet to really see a provider that has said nailed every area where you've got absolutely everything you need. Like I say, I know we're going to go into some more depth in this conversation, but I think in terms of a quick answer or a headline answer, I think the answer is no, and we'll go into the reasons why later on.
Okay, so obviously, we as a business also use several systems. And one of the things we did was to do a white paper, like a draft white paper that we have done, where we're looking at this idea of one system to rule them all. And there are claims by several. To be fair, actually, some of them are very good competitors. They're very good at what they do. But actually, the idea that you can have everything in one place, it could go all wrong. The reality is much, much more complicated. And when people's health and social care leaders and managers start chasing that all-in-one platform, inevitably things start to go wrong. And the failures that you get in the, trying to get that sort of system can actually cause more problems. And that's why we always look at modular or best of breed approach to say, look, how many systems do I need to deliver the different things that I want to deliver, so that you have much stronger compliance. So look, it's good to have you back in the hot seat, Louis. So let's get into it straight away. So the thinking behind we want everything in one place What's behind that? What are the reasons why health and social care managers and leaders are asking for an all-in-one system?
I think, like you say, a lot of the time there's the perception that it's easier. It's easy to have everything in one place. That's probably the most commonsensical answer. But a lot of it can be, one of the points I'd like to make is procurement fatigue. We know that looking for these systems can be quite painstaking at times. You might need to, first of all, you need to look at how do I procure this system. So whether you're using search engines, whether you're using some sort of vendor or person that helps you with your supplier choices, whether you've been to events and you've met people and you want to find out a bit more about the system. The whole procurement process can be very difficult. And if you get sold or presented something that says it's going to solve all your problems, it may seem a lot easier to say, look, I don't have the time to keep fishing around or browsing for these different systems. This sounds like it does the plan. It's got some good reviews on Trustpilot or FIFA or Google or whatever. Let's get it in. But I know we did an episode recently, obviously, where we look at people who rush to get systems in without the right planning, the readiness, preparing well, implementation planning, and that's another problem that is more post-selection. But I think procurement fatigue is definitely one point. That follows then on nicely to sort of the board narrative, for the bigger organisations where they say, look, we've got a single source of information and data, everything's in one place. Obviously that presents other risks, like I said earlier, but it may sound a lot fancier to say, look, well, we're not relying on 4 or 5 different systems, and this system doesn't push information properly to that system. We've got everything in one place. And I think the other one is support fatigue as well. If you've got several suppliers, key contacts, different ways of getting support from these different platforms, it can be a little bit draining. And even some of the conversations I've had recently with customers who are maybe moving from a current provider, whomever that may be, a lot of the challenges are, look, we had an issue with this, we didn't feel we got adequate support, or it took too long to get an update on this matter or that matter. So I think, again, the idea of having just one provider to deal with and one way of getting support does sound very nice on the face of it, yeah.
I get it, actually. When I talk to compliance managers and business owners, one of the most difficult things is to have control, even to try to track who has done this training, which documents are expiring and all that. When I talk to them, actually, they are worried more about the administrative side. And obviously, when you get commissioners or inspectors, regulatory inspectors from CQC or Ofsted come in, they want to see the evidence. And if you don't have the evidence, that's a problem. And I think I've always felt that was one of the reasons why we end up with a tick box exercise where people are ticking boxes to say we've done that. And then you forget actually the operational side to say what does it mean operationally, because the challenge of just staying afloat is difficult enough. So look, maybe to pick it up from there, I get it, the promise of fewer vendors, lower training overhead, one dashboard with everything. But what's the catch? If somebody, because I've seen companies, and you and I know that there are companies out there that are selling the dream. What's the catch there?
Yeah, well, I think the catch is, like you say, when a provider tries to cover absolutely everything, whether it's the learning management side, whether it's the training side, whether it's rostering, whether it's, incident reporting, whether it's capturing evidence, having good audit trails, activity logs, HR, specialisms and so on, inevitably one, or more likely more, will fail in some way. Maybe it's just too basic for what your needs as a business are. Maybe it actually doesn't work that well because the technology is perhaps a little bit bodged. I've heard that from actually a few conversations I even had yesterday with 2 or 3 different clients about bodged technologies where, things just don't work. It's clunky. It might be slow. It doesn't give me the right type of reporting back. So inevitably something, but more than likely, several things will fail. It might say something on a bullet pointed list on a website to say we cover HR, but what does it really mean when it says covering HR? HR is a huge topic, and we could do several podcasts just about HR. and HR in health and social care in particular is very tricky and a very specialist subject, actually. Without plugging our ComplyPlus legal tool that we launched last week too much, there's a reason we partnered with lawyers to build a product that's suitable, because there's a lot of work that goes into some of these areas, and they're quite deep areas, and if you don't provide the right things, your clients are still going to get in trouble inevitably, and then they're going to need another solution on top of what they think they're getting from you. So I think for me, and obviously with some of the changes we've seen in CQC's assessment framework now, there's the need for continuous gathering of evidence, logging that evidence, having that audit trail. There's no system out there that I think completely covers everyone. There are a lot of systems that might give you that broadness or that breadth of service to say, yeah, we've got something that does something on this. We're not quite sure exactly how much it does, but it says it does it. So, we, like you say, we can tick that box. But specialisms, like you say, is the key, and integrated systems, as we've said on a recent episode, for me is the key. And even with what we're doing, we do have specialisms. Like you say, we come from the training and workforce development background. We've got compliance experts in the business, but we don't claim to have a HR system. We don't claim to have, the best policy and procedure library that we have. We do have a library, we do have templates, but we don't claim to be experts necessarily in policies and procedures, although we're trying to build towards something like that. So I think, for me, it's about, if it looks too good to be true, it usually is.
Yeah. Look, you're absolutely right. And one of the things to mention there is the professional record standards body. So look, when you're building systems, actually, from an HR perspective, even the clinical care records, you need to align those systems. So again, if you're coming from a clinical background, from a training and development background for healthcare workforce, social care workforce, those should be in place. But you find that not everyone is coming from that background, and they don't invest in bringing the right people in. It's one thing to build technology, but actually, how useful is it going to be? Am I going to get outcomes-based evidence on the back of it? You were saying about CQC demanding continuous sort of monitoring. If it's going to be shallow, then it's not gonna cut it. It's not gonna work. And there's an illusion there of completeness. And when you look at it, actually, it's much more dangerous than having gaps that are so obvious. Because if you strongly believe actually that I've got all these systems and they're going to work, then you get that impression that you are compliant, and more often than not, you are not. And that's what we've seen over and over again. So that takes us nicely into the next section that I want to talk about, is around regulatory context. So reality when it hits, and then the regulatory side of things. The many different sort of frameworks. I've already mentioned the PRSV, the Professional Record Standards Body, but also there's the Digital Data Technology Assessment criteria, and then the Data Security and Protection Toolkit, which most of the NHS organizations, if not all of them, as well as the private healthcare, are using. Then the Digital Safety Clinical Standards as well. Why do they matter in this debate? I think you may have touched on some of the reasons in your first statement, but maybe let's go into a little bit more detail now.
Yeah, well, like you say, because every compliance system in health and social care operates under that web of assurance, there's several, like you say, criteria that have to be taken into consideration. So obviously the first, and probably one of the most important ones, is the CQC assessment framework. It requires auditable evidence against 34 quality statements. So when you look at things from a brass sort of tax perspective, that is quite a critical area to be thinking about. You've also got things like the Digital Technology Assessment Criteria, or the DTAC, which is obviously the NHS baseline for data protection, security, usability, and interoperability as well. So that is also another key consideration. You've also got things like the DCB 0129 and 0160, which is your clinical safety standards. Touches on things like information standards relating to risk management of health IT systems. So again, very, very important things at a more of a higher level governance level, but still, like I say, a very, very key consideration to have. You've also got things like the Professional Record Standards Body, the PRSB, So we're looking at content standards for person-centered digital records. Again, highly important, probably not an everyday consideration by many, but still very, very critical. And now obviously we've got the Data Use and Access Act 2025, which is obviously something that came in this year, which updates data sharing laws as well. So for me, they're definitely some of the key things that need to be considered. And although an all-in-one might seem to cover all these modules, but not others, if one piece lags, then you're still going to be in a bit of trouble and needing that additional support. So, like I say, these are things at a higher level that businesses and business leaders and managers need to be thinking about. Although it sounds like a lot of jargon and legislation and laws and things that don't really affect the day-to-day, they are very important considerations, yeah.
Yeah, and it's really important, some of the points, I'll pick on a couple of the points that you made there. I come from healthcare originally. I worked in the NHS, I worked in private healthcare, primary care, before we started working with adult social care. So I came from an environment where there's clinical governance frameworks to follow. And you have a whole directorate actually that is looking at some of these things. You have an IT department with the leader sitting on the board, right? So some of these things that you mentioned there, they are in place because organizations have invested in the infrastructure to have the right people in place. But obviously, if you're a smaller healthcare organization or social care organization, some of these things sound more like they're built for the NHS, but actually you're bound by the same standards. Right? If you're going to adopt technology, it's got to meet the standards that are out there. But if you don't even know that those standards exist, that's quite a challenge. And we've seen that over and over. One of the things you mentioned was interoperability, right? Which is how systems are integrated, how systems talk to each other. So you find that because we keep power with open API keys, for our system to talk to another system or to get data from another system. But we've also gone into places whereby the systems are built in such an old way of doing things. There's no way to connect them. You actually have to start afresh. And that can be quite draining for organizations who feel that solution is working. But they are hindered from growing and innovating because the systems are built in such an archaic way. It's difficult to connect them. So, look, these are big things, and although they may not seem like they're affecting the day-to-day, but if you're using a digital care planning system, rostering system, all those, you have to abide by these rules. And, if you fail on integration or safety, it might not mean that it doesn't mean that your service is unsafe, but actually the software may fail to prove compliance. I don't know how you feel about that.
Well, exactly, yeah. That's why we advise customers to treat it as treat these, these almost, like I say, it's a commercial bundle rather than an architectural truth, let's say. People are trying to add value all the time across several industries, including ours. They're trying to say it will do this, it will do that. And maybe because they have a module within the system that does touch on this, they have every right to list that they can help you with this. But how far does that help go? Like, how true is that? Is it, can it really solve, like you say, some of the problems we've touched on above and in some of the previous episodes? I think a lot of the time they fall quite short and people get disappointed rather than getting a solution. So, yeah, that would be, that would be my take on things and where they are right now.
Look, I completely agree with you, Louis, on the points that you've raised there. And I just want to add a little bit more context. You mentioned the Data Use and Access Act 2025, which obviously has now been approved. And it modernizes GDPR, DPA, BCR, sort of post-Brexit. And we're looking at it looks at how we can enable innovation while also protecting individuals so that you don't lose those protections that were there with the Data Protection Act and GDPR. So it's about clarifying compliance, supporting smart data and digital verification, because even now the government is talking about digital IDs. We're already doing some digital verification in one way or the other in most cases anyway. Also some updates to information standards, enhancing data sharing for public services, and also rolling it out, gradually. We're going to see probably a bit more pressure as we get to the new year. And ICO has given the full guidance, and organizations like CQC and Ofsted will probably be looking at that as well to see adherence to the Data Use and Access Act 2025. So I want us to get a little bit more practical now, because we do know that things go wrong with all-in-one systems. I mean, we're no strangers to that. We have used some purported all-in-one systems only to end up actually getting rid of them and starting afresh. So what are the classic failure patterns that you've seen in your time sort of in this sector?
I'd say probably about 5 stand out. Like I say, when we were looking at the, preparing for this podcast earlier this week, 5 sort of stand out to me when I sort of rack my brains and go through some personal sort of notes and so on. So I think depth versus breadth trade-off is probably, the main one really. I'd say most solutions or suites that people subscribe to or sign these contracts for probably cover around 60% of what they actually need. The other 40% is not there, and then inevitably they need additional support from other providers or people who specialise in the areas where they're failing. It doesn't mean that some of these systems aren't working at, say, 100% capacity in some of the areas that we listed earlier, but overall, I'd say the average is it normally covers about 60% of what people actually need. You've also got things like the incomplete assurance. I know we just touched on the assurance side of things for providers. One module might meet the DTAC, but another or several others don't. So, again, that's going to cause problems later down the line. Another point I'd like to go into is shelf-ware. This is another very prominent point where people oversubscribe. People often get things in at the procurement stage. They think it's a good idea. They think they're getting value for money, but there's no plan in place to use it. And inevitably, it never gets implemented, or that module on the system, never actually sees the light of day. Whereas actually the business is paying for it every year or every month, depending on what sort of contractual terms they have. So I think shelf-ware is another big one and another common mistake most providers make. Vendor lock-in. Once your data's trapped in some of these systems, every update, can cost money. That can obviously be a big problem, particularly from a budgeting perspective, where providers may, put up fees unexpectedly or with little notice. It might mean that actually moving data from their system to another system is very, very problematic, and it could even mean huge data losses because the provider may make it sound like it's impossible to move system. I think we do see a lot of examples of that when people are trying to transition between different systems. And inspection time friction. Evidence is scattered across different modules in a system that is maybe not very well integrated together, making CQC preparation a real scramble. Really, you want systems that, as we said on a previous episode, that are aligned to each other, they push data properly, you get the necessary reports you need to evidence your compliance that meets your business and meets the way CQC are auditing services right now, in particular if it's a CQC registered business. So I think, inspection time friction is another one. We even get some of our clients, as you know, rushing around a few days before inspectors are coming in, almost expecting us to send them everything in advance and so on. So there is a bit of, provider responsibility there as well, that people do need to be more prepared. They do need to learn how to use some of these systems. But I think there's also issues with some of the systems out there that don't give the providers the best chance to thrive and be well prepared for inspections as well.
Look, that's a really crucial point. And like you alluded there, we've seen that many times where people that, we talked about this last week as well, where no one is taking ownership of the system. And they know that they've got the system, they know that it's supposed to do all these things, but they never used it for all those things. And then when the day of reckoning comes, they're thinking, how do I get all this information to say I've been using this system, yet there's no evidence that you've been using the system. So it becomes a challenge. Then, this system is useless. We failed our inspection because of this useless system. But actually, you need to invest in understanding what you're buying, isn't it? And then use it. And then engage with the vendor as well to continue to have conversations, to continue to get support. And I can imagine, actually, this obviously this looks like chaos, isn't it? Like organizational chaos. What does it do on the human side? Because I'm thinking of the frontline nurse or doctor or the care worker who is not involved in making any of the decisions, but they get affected so profoundly because it's quite disheartening when you fail in inspection or you're told that you are unsafe, and yet you know that you're waking up every day to go to work to do a fantastic job, but systems are failing you repeatedly.
Mm. Yeah, well, I mean, things, there is something called change fatigue, isn't there? Staff, just get tired of trying to learn how to maybe use new systems. And then providers end up paying thousands a year for systems that end up basically being digital filing cabinets. But usually, like you say, technology fails because adoption fails. That is probably and again, we've done a whole episode on it, I think, last week. And that basically happens when people aren't digitally confident or feel they've been given the right sort of onboarding or preparation for when these systems are implemented. And usually, again, that is normally a leadership failure when the right investment hasn't been made in the right training. Digitally confident, as we were saying last week, doesn't mean someone who can pick up a phone and do a TikTok video and publish it out there to the world. Digitally confident has many meanings, particularly in health and social care, with the breadth of equipment available now and the different ways of doing things, whether it's to do with records, whether it's to do with, like I say, the use of actual equipment that is being used on service users and patients up and down the country and across the world. Digitally confident has a much bigger meaning than maybe it does for someone who's maybe working in a social media department of a corporate business, for example, or just any human being. I think people in health and social care, digitally confident has a much deeper meaning and wider meaning. Let's say it has to cover a lot more areas. So for me, again, on the human side, they're some of the realities that are being faced. But I think a lot of the time people don't want to admit some of these things, or they turn a blind eye to it because, again, it doesn't really affect the bottom line directly, or again, the compliance element, as we've said several times, sits way down the priorities a lot of the time until it matters, and that's when the firefighting exercises come out.
Yeah, look, it's ironic, isn't it, how we're now relating back to digital literacy. Our episode last week was on digital literacy, and when we suggested it to the team, they were wondering whether there was even enough to talk about for a whole episode on digital literacy, and yet now we keep referring back to digital literacy. It's such a crucial thing, isn't it?
Yeah. No, it does have a big bearing on a lot of things, particularly these bigger organisations that even we deal with. It's there's so many use cases or case studies we can use in doing sort of root cause analysis on why things haven't worked, why things are failing, what change fatigue does in businesses, or when people aren't ready, whether it be for inspections or new systems being implemented, what are the effects and what are the root causes. A lot of it does boil down to things we touched on in last week's episode.
Yeah. So look, so far you have put a very good case against this idea of an all-in-one compliance system that is everything that you need. So the other side is putting the case for best of breed. To sort of say, look, I'm going to look at the different things that I want to do and how I'm going to achieve them. Then I'll find the right systems to help me deliver on those goals. So if you were to balance the argument, tell us a little bit more about why looking at a best of breed approach would be a better option for decision makers in health and social care when it comes to selecting their compliance systems.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you need to look at are things like depth and flexibility. Specialists, they will go deep. For example, if you've got a dedicated LMS, it should handle the analytics and the CPD tracking, for example. If you've got a TMS or rostering tool, it should manage competencies in real time. Governance platforms, they should keep policies, audits and incidents linked and integrated and map it towards the training and the rostering. Everything should be aligned, and it should go to that level of detail, which is quite, like you say, quite difficult to find. But ultimately, each tool should focus on outcomes, not a checkbox integration, which again is the classic that's out there on the market right now. You need things like modern APIs so that the data can sync seamlessly between the different modules on the platform. You have to make sure that these things connect securely and push accurate data. Otherwise, you end up with clunky modules that again gives you the bad output that then causes some of these things like the inspection friction that we were discussing earlier. So, like I say, for me, they're the things that people should be looking for, and also just the level of expertise that people go into. Who's behind some of these tools. Obviously, doing your usual due diligence is really important, checking reviews, seeing customer testimonials and so on. But for me, specialists will go deep, and particularly when you look at those 3 examples I've listed there.
Because some of the things to add there, because I come from clinical background as well, is that you want consistency of data. If I'm sitting in a clinic here in Warwickshire and I'm referring a patient, actually that data actually needs to align to the standards that are accepted in the sector, and it's really important. And okay, look, what about the drawbacks? Because obviously some people find that maybe they find the perfect system, who knows, right? But what are the drawbacks of building it a full compliance system with different providers, like you've described there?
But like you say, it's a governance and integration overhead, isn't it? You need product ownership. You need clear data models and API testing. If you don't have that sort of infrastructure, it's very difficult to get that best of breed. Without that, it's many tabs, many truths, let's say. So for me, that is the drawback. But obviously, the pros of it can be very fruitful if things are done properly. Yeah.
So we're talking about what sort of reporting we get here as well, isn't it? To sort of say, look, when you bring in a system, you are, from a diffusion perspective, you go through the different steps, but you have always got the outcome in mind, isn't it? So what are we going to get out of this system, and how is this going to help us make better decisions as decision makers? So success, I guess, of these systems depends on the maturity of the governance of an organization, which is perhaps why that infrastructure that is sometimes difficult to replicate, the infrastructure that we see in NHS trusts that are better funded, to have the right people, the right expertise, because you need a clear data strategy, technology strategy as well, to go maybe 3 to 5 years ahead, trying to anticipate what's going to be needed. And also, it's not just about buying the tools, because sometimes we get complacent. I buy the tools and I've got a solution that should work. I've done it, isn't it?
Yeah. A lot of people think that when they sign that contract or pay the invoice, it's almost job done and that problem's solved. But far from it, really. Far from it, and it's a mindset issue, as we've covered again on previous episodes. So they're the things I'd be looking for if I was in a position where I needed to procure something to cover my organisation from a compliance perspective. But like I say, believing in that the one system can do absolutely everything and is going to solve all my problems it's a fairy tale, really.
So in other ways, you're saying you can't outsource your governance to another organization. Even if they have a perfect system, but you still need to know what to do yourself, and your teams also need to know what they're supposed to be doing, and the fact that the technology is there to support them to make better decisions or to improve the workflows. Look, I completely get that, and I over the years, actually, the different phases of my career in healthcare and academia, I've seen that more and more. Some of the things that I knew afterwards, I wish I'd known them when I was on the front line, working on the wards or working in the community settings that I worked in. But look, we're going towards the end of this episode now. So I just wanted to talk about decision-making frameworks and also some practical takeaways that people can go and actually implement after listening to this podcast. So I want us to help our listeners to make sense of things here. If I'm a care home director and I'm deciding between an all-in-one regulatory compliance management system, or a modular stack where I'm taking different bits and building something together? Where do I even start?
Well, I think the key, as I know you're big on this sort of word, is you start with outcomes, not features. So you need to ask some key questions when in the procurement phase to sort of say, look, what evidence must I produce? Map your mandatory artifacts, your training records, your incident learning, audit trails to the CQC quality statements and DTAC headings. If you do that, all of a sudden you're on the right path to achieving compliance. Rather than looking at does it do this fancy thing, or does it have this feature? Does it have this feature? Features aren't really relevant. It's outcomes that all these providers need. So again, it's a mindset change there. But think about outcomes. Score depth, not gloss. So the shiny modern systems that have got all this AI capability and so on, yes, they look good. Yes, they might actually be even, in some cases, easier to use at times. But does it go deep enough for the type of service you're offering, or the space in your, the service you're providing? That's the key. Again, looking at your organisation, not looking too much actually at the system. Yes, ease of use and these modern dashboards. Obviously, it's going to help with the digital literacy conversation that we've had. But still, if everyone can still use the tool, but it doesn't give you the outcomes you need, then it's still a pointless tool and a waste of money, and you're still going to fail in one, if not several areas. Testing interoperability, a word we've used a few times on today's podcast. Don't believe when people say we integrate, we have APIs, we do this, we do that. Actually ask for some of the critical information like the FHIR endpoints. Actually look at the different types of export formats that are available and a proof of value using real data. Don't just make assumptions, or just because you've read it does it, and don't make that assumption, because just because someone says they integrate, what are they integrating? What does that, what does integrate even mean in the context of the solution they're proposing? I think obviously assuring clinical safety in cyber security is important. So verify, the pack supplier, look at the DCB 0129, and run your own governance for the DCB 0160 as well. Do that detailed due diligence. Even before you start even looking at a provider, if there's something that you like about them, make sure those checks are being done by the people who are trained to do that, or by people who know what they're doing in that area. And then finally, I think even considering planning your exit is really important. Check data portability, and make sure that there is an exit strategy, because a lot of the time, if you ask many people running these services or making decisions on some of these systems, they will have a story of a company that they've left. There's not many that have bought one solution from the beginning and have stayed with them up until the present time. There's always going to be a need for change. It could be a business decision, it could be a financial decision, it could be because maybe the system you're using has, it's run its course, it's no longer fit for purpose for the business. So if you don't think about exit even at the start, you're missing a trick, and you're potentially going to put the organization in at some sort of risk. Maybe not right now, maybe not even in the next 3 or 4 years, but there's definitely going to come a time where you're probably going to leave that solution.
You're absolutely right there. And we have seen that whereby people bring in a system, but it's got American values. For example, in America they use Fahrenheit, and here we use degrees Celsius. How are you going to record your temperature? And do your staff know actually how to convert those values? So something as simple as that actually just shows you that the right questions were not asked right at the beginning. Is this system actually fit for purpose to deliver care services in the UK, based on the regulatory framework in the UK, but also based on, you talked about the FHIR endpoints, to sort of say, look, if I'm going to send data to a GP, for example, from a care home, would that data make sense? Are we speaking the same language? Look, we could do a whole podcast, actually, maybe even a series about what you've just described there. And look, I think we'll come back to talk about it more and more in the future. what I want to think about is one now is operationally. You talk about the higher level things, maybe board level decision making around a framework that we use to assess technology suitability before we adopt it. What about operationally? Actually, how does that work? Because you are quite involved in helping organizations to bring in our system and our system to live alongside other systems and then talk to other systems as well. So maybe can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think the best guidance or advice you could give is to get people to adopt a hub and spoke model, where one core system of record per domain. So you have something that covers the training side, the care side, the governance side, and make sure it's connected via open standards. Build a lightweight evidence lake for inspection reports. That'd be my sort of foresight for people if we're giving advice. And then if you roll it out in capability waves, where you look at starting with policy and document control, add training and competence, then look at incidents and learning, and then finally you integrate then the care records and the core data for your service users. Each wave then will reduce risk and it will build staff confidence in the long run as well.
I like the fact that you refer to training and competencies there. I've been at pains trying to explain to decision makers, usually board level, to say, look at training as your best friend when it comes to compliance. So training people to use a system correctly should not be overlooked. It's a crucial step because actually, because when I was in the NHS, some of the technology was developed within the trust. Some of the technology was brought in from outside. And whenever we developed a piece of technology internally, we would put training as part of the budget to sort of say, look, we need to go and train people from different departments, from different wards, so that they can then go and train others within their departments to use that tool correctly. Even if you do an e-learning module, you still need an element of maybe a lunch and learn style where you talk people through the logic. Because remember, people know what they're doing already. They're already delivering care, right? So training is often understated, and I think it's such a crucial part of the adoption process to include there. But look, I like the roadmap, and I think maybe we should do a tool that people can download to build a framework, a framework that they can use, and then also another one on how they can operationalize. So I'll come back to you, later on to see how we can do that. So let's go to takeaways now. If I'm a leader in health and social care, it doesn't matter whether it's healthcare or it's adult social care or domiciliary care, or I'm a registered manager. What are the key takeaways? If you had to give me 3 most important takeaways from what we've discussed today, and what does it mean? How do I do it when I get back to work?
Well, yeah, I think the obvious one to start with is that there's no one system to rule them all, as we've done the white paper on. These suites are bundles; they're not magic. It's really important to look at depth assurance and openness matter more than just the convenience side. So I think that is probably one of the biggest takeaways from this episode and the research we've done. Compliance is an ecosystem. The winning formula is governance and digital literacy and making sure standards align. That will give you that compliance outcome that every business is looking for. And I think finally, design for inspection from day one. Like I say, every module should export human, readable, immutable audit trails mapped to CQC quality statements. And if you're not looking at those outcomes from the start, you're not ready. You're not inspection ready. And again, we've wrote several things, blogs and done podcasts on inspection readiness. It all links to that point. So I think if you've got those 3 things in mind, that's an excellent takeaway and a good starting foundation for looking at the right solutions for your business in the market today. Yeah.
That's very important. But I also want to add there to say we're not talking about inspection readiness. We're talking about being proactively setting up your organization to align to the regulatory standards, because those are the minimum standards that are expected. I want to remind people not to just tick a box, actually actively do it, monitor and audit to ensure that the system is continuing to give you what it promised. Because sometimes actually you bring in a system and then you forget why you brought in that system, then it just becomes another expense that is costing your business in many ways than money. Because going back again to that complacency, look, these are the really three big ones that are crucial. So look, we are having honest discussions here. Some of these things, we've known them for years. Our podcast has been running for 1 year. I forgot to say that, Louis, actually, we've been running the podcast for 1 year. I can't believe it, actually, from where we started. But today we're talking about a really crucial thing that we care about, because we develop systems, we develop a lot of software and align it to the things that we are talking about here. And we know also how difficult it is to build digital ecosystems that are resilient, to ensure the quality of care, to ensure safety of service users, and overall good governance. Because if organizations are not well led, we're failing on Regulation 17, all the other things fail. And also, when we talk about safety, Regulation 12, these regulations are interrelated. Even staff, Regulation 18, Regulation 19. That's why Louis is saying you should align to CQC regulations and quality statements. And, that's what we do, even when we do training. But what's important is about us being honest. And Louis, also, thank you for the clarity and candor that you have given our listeners out there. And I hope, actually, they do see value in this. So in the next episode, we're going to be exploring risk, incidents, and learning loops when we're adopting technology, how technology can turn compliance evidence into real improvement rather than just a tick box exercise. So look, thank you for joining me, Louis, today. And any final message to our listeners out there before we close the session?
No, I think, like you say, these are these are very important things to consider, and also really guidance for people out there using maybe some of these systems at the moment. Don't expect miracles from them. Do some of the checks, look at some of the takeaways, as we've said, from this session, and apply it to the current provider or your procurement of your next system. Or if you're in that phase of looking for a system right now, or you're using an existing provider, you'll be in one of each camp. You'll be in one of the camps. So yeah, hopefully people will find the episode useful. And like you say, I'm sure we'll have some downloadable resources that will help guide providers out there on the market very soon as well. I think that'll be a critical next step for people. Yeah.
Thank you, Louis. To our listeners and viewers out there, thank you for following and listening to our podcast. My message is stay compliant, keep learning, and be proud of the care that you deliver. We're always learning, we're always improving. Let's keep that culture going. Thank you very much. See you next week.